I've been digging into the roots of certain words we take for granted lately. Take eagle. The Latin is aquila. To the Roman legions, it wasn't just a bird. It was a standard, a physical object that represented the soul of the unit. If you lost the aquila, the unit was dead. I'm Zeke, and I've been running near-death experiences long enough to recognize when someone is describing a standard they weren't prepared to carry. A few weeks ago, I received an account from a man named Robert. He's 71 now, but he spent 32 years in the Marine Corps. He spent a lifetime dealing with classified information, things meant for a select few. But what happened on his porch in North Carolina 11 days ago wasn't a tactical failure. His heart stopped for 17 minutes after a fall that shouldn't have happened. Robert isn't here to give a sermon. He's giving a briefing on what he saw when the clock stopped. 32 years in the Corps, you learn how to place your feet, you learn SOP for everything, how to walk, how to clear a room, how to fall so you don't break your own neck. Then you're 71 and you're just walking down your own porch steps on a Tuesday morning in May. I look. It wasn't a trip. It wasn't a stumble. My boot hit the second step, the one where the gray paint always peels when the humidity gets too high in North Carolina. I remember the smell of that damp, sun-beaten wood. Then it went dark. No transition, no fade to black, just a hard cut in the film. The doctors told me later I was out for 17 minutes. 17 minutes where my heart wasn't doing its job. But I wasn't in the dark. I was standing about 6 feet above the porch floor, looking down. It was a reconnaissance view. I could see the top of my own head. My hair is thinner than I like to admit in the mirror. I saw my boots, the same heavy soles I've had for a decade, twisted at an angle that should have sent a white-hot spike of pain up my leg. But I didn't feel it. My pulse wasn't hammering in my ears. My shoulders dropped. I didn't even know I'd been holding them up that high for the last 71 years. Everything was quiet. My Bible was lying face down in the dirt by the bottom step. It had fallen out of my hand when I went down. I noticed the way the grit from the driveway was caught in the spine of the book. I wanted to reach down and brush it off. It bothered me. Seeing it in the dirt like that right next to my own face. My skin was gray. The color had just exited, like someone had turned the saturation dial all the way down on the monitor. I looked at myself and I didn't see a person. I saw a piece of equipment that had reached its expiration date. There wasn't any panic. It was just data. But the air felt heavy. Not like that Carolina swamp heat. It felt thick, like it had a texture you could grab. And then I heard it. It wasn't a voice, not like a man speaking. It was a frequency. A hum that started in the roots of my teeth and moved into my ribs until they were vibrating. It was calling a name, not Robert. It was calling the person I was before I ever had a name or a rank. I started to move. I didn't use my legs. I was being pulled, like reverse gravity. I looked back one last time at the Bible in the dirt, the way the pages were fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel yet, and then the sky started to warp. The blue was bleeding out. It was turning into silver, and then the silver turned into something that looked like hammered gold. I was rising fast now. The porch, the house, the peeling gray paint, it was all shrinking. I was heading into a storm, but it wasn't made of rain. The climb didn't stop. I was breaking through layers of what looked like gold-tinted fog, but it felt like high-altitude turbulence. Think back to the belly of a C-130 during a night jump. You hit those pockets where the air just drops out from under you. That was the frequency. My hands came up. I don't know why. I didn't exactly have hands, but I could feel my fingers spreading wide, trying to find some kind of purchase on the wind. I couldn't catch it. It was moving through me and around me at the same time. Then I saw the formation. That's the only way to describe it. It wasn't a flock of birds. It was a line of them, spaced out with a discipline that looked intentional. These were eagles, but they weren't the ones you see on a recruiting poster. These things were massive. Their wingspans were longer than my porch was wide, and they were gray. Not a clean silver gray. It was the color of a dirty tarmac after a rainstorm. I got close to one. It was hovering on a thermal I couldn't see. I looked at its feathers. They were a mess. One of the main flight feathers was snapped halfway up, jagged at the end. There were these black marks, scars, running across its chest, like it had been hit by a live wire and just kept flying. It looked beaten. Its body was thin, the skin around its beak was cracked and pale. This wasn't a young bird. This was a survivor. The sound of their wings was like dry parchment snapping in a gale. Crack, crack. They weren't flapping. They were just holding. Below them, the sky was a different story. It was a disaster. There were thousands, maybe more, of these smaller birds. They were bright, neon greens, sharp reds. Their feathers were perfect. Not a scratch on them, no scars, no broken tips. And they were losing their minds. I could hear their cries, high-pitched like static on a radio. They were diving. They were folding their wings, trying to find the deck, trying to get under the pressure of the wind. They thought safety was down, but there wasn't any safety down there. I watched the wind catch a bright green one. It hit an invisible wall and just tumbled. It looked like a toy being thrown into a thresher. Its wings were thrashing, but it was fighting the current instead of using it. It didn't have the experience to know that the only way out was up. I've been sitting with that specific image, Robert describes, the difference between the birds that looked perfect and the ones that looked broken. I read a study out of the University of Virginia a few years ago that touched on something similar in NDE imagery, where the things that look the most damaged in our world are actually the most functional in that one. Robert is moving into a part of his account now where the symbolism stops being a visual and starts being a message. What he sees next changes the register of everything he's described so far. The old gray birds, the ones that looked like they should have been dead years ago, they just tilted. I saw one eagle. Its left eye was milk white, completely blind, but it leaned its scarred shoulder into the wind. It didn't resist, it just accepted the push. And the moment it did, it shot upward. It didn't have to work. The storm was doing the lifting. I looked at the bright birds again. They were still diving. They were panicking. They were terrified of the very thing that was meant to carry them. I felt a knot in my throat. My jaw was tight, like I was trying to hold back a scream I couldn't even voice. I wanted to reach down and grab them, to tell them to look up, to show them what the gray ones were doing. Some of them finally saw it. I watched a small blue bird stop its dive. It was shaking. You could see the tremors in its tail feathers. It looked up at the old eagle with the snapped wing. It copied the tilt. It was shaky at first, nearly flipping over, but then it caught the lift. It started to rise. It followed the gray eagle right into that gold light at the top of the sky. I realized then that the gray ones weren't just birds. They were leaders. They were the ones who had lived through enough storms on the ground to know that you don't fight the wind when it's trying to take you home. They had the scars to prove they could survive anything the sky threw at them. The light was getting hotter now. Not burning, but solid. I felt the vibration in my marrow again. The hum. It was louder. And I knew I wasn't looking at eagles anymore. I was looking at something classified. Something meant for a briefing I wasn't prepared for. The turbulence stopped. It didn't taper off, it just ceased, like someone had cut the engines in mid-flight. I was standing on something that felt as solid as a carrier deck, but I couldn't see the surface. The gold fog was gone. The air was clear. And then the hum hit me. It wasn't just in my teeth anymore, it was in my skin, my breath. It was a sound that had the weight of lead but the clarity of a bell. It was coming from him. He was just there. Standing about 10 yards away, I couldn't look directly at his face. It wasn't because it was too bright, it was because my brain couldn't process the resolution, like trying to watch a 4K feed on an old black and white tube TV. The hardware just wasn't built for it. My knees hit the deck. I didn't decide to do it, my joints just unlocked. I put my forehead against whatever I was standing on. My hands were shaking. I could see the age spots on the back of my knuckles, the thin skin, the old marine ring I've worn since Paris Island. "You're looking at the scars," he said. The voice didn't come through the air. It arrived inside my chest. It felt like a warm hand pressing against my lungs. I didn't look up. I just stared at my own hands. "The eagles," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, like a recording of a recording. "The gray ones, they're damaged. They're the only ones that know how to use the wind," he said. I thought about the young birds, the bright ones, the ones that hadn't ever been through a storm. I thought about how they were falling because they didn't have a single mark on them to show they knew how to fight. I've been thinking about those scars Robert noticed, the damaged flight feathers and the marks from lightning. In a culture that spends billions of dollars every year to hide any sign of aging, seeing those broken feathers as the primary reason the birds can fly. It's a total reversal of our physics. I've read through a lot of these accounts, and usually the focus is on being made new or being restored. But for Robert, the power is actually located in the damage. He's about to get a specific breakdown of who those eagles really are, and it isn't what I expected when I first opened this file. He moved closer. I could see his feet. He wasn't wearing boots, just simple, worn sandals. The skin of his feet was calloused, dirty. It looked like he'd walked 1,000 miles in the dust. "You think they're forgotten," he said. I looked up then, just a little, just enough to see his hands. They were reaching out. "The ones in the small houses," he continued. "The ones in the rooms with the white walls and the smell of bleach. The ones whose phones don't ring. I saw them then, not as eagles, but as people. I saw an old woman. She was sitting in a wheelchair in a hallway that looked like 1,000 nursing homes I've walked past. Her hair was thin. Her hands were curled up with arthritis. She looked like she was waiting for a clock to run out." "She's an eagle?" I asked. My throat was so tight I could barely get the air out. "She's held the line," he said. I saw her life. It flickered past like a series of slides in a briefing. I saw her lose her husband in '72. I saw her work 2 jobs. I saw her pray in the middle of the night when the bills were more than the check. I saw her crying in the dark of that nursing home room because her daughter hadn't visited in 3 months. Every time she chose to trust him instead of giving up, a feather turned gray. Every time she prayed for someone who didn't even know her name, a scar appeared on her wing. "The young ones follow the scars," he said. I thought about the bright birds I'd seen in the storm. They were the ones who had everything: youth, strength, perfect feathers. But they were the ones who were terrified. They didn't have any experience with the wind. They didn't know that the storm was the only way to get high enough to see the light. "They follow the ones who have survived," he said. I looked at him, and for a second I saw his own hands clearly, the marks in the palms. They weren't just wounds. They were the original scars. They were the pattern. "I'm 71, I whispered. I was looking at my own marine ring again. I thought the mission was over. "The storm is just starting," he said. He didn't give me a list of orders. He didn't tell me to go tell the world. He just showed me a jar. The jar, it wasn't like anything in a museum. It looked like thick, heavy glass, but it was shot through with veins of gold, like it had been poured in layers over 1,000 years. It wasn't just sitting there. It was humming. Not the loud frequency from before, but a soft, collective whisper. It sounded like a stadium full of people all breathing at once. "The reserves," he said. I leaned in. I didn't mean to. My body just drifted closer to the glass. Inside, there was this liquid. It looked like oil, but it was glowing. It was swirling in slow, heavy circles. What am I looking at?" I asked. My voice was finally coming back, but it felt like I was speaking through a layer of wool. "Decades of silence," he said. My hands came up. I reached for the jar, but I didn't touch it. I could feel the heat coming off it. It wasn't the kind of heat that burns skin. It was the kind of heat you feel in your chest when you're finally home after a long deployment. "Every prayer they thought hit the ceiling," he said. "Every tear that landed on a nursing home pillow." The whispers inside the jar got louder. I could almost make out words, names, requests for children who had stopped calling, prayers for a country that had stopped looking at them. It was a massive logistics operation of the spirit. All of it stored. All of it kept under pressure. "The seal is coming off," he said. Suddenly, the view shifted. It was like he'd flipped a switch on a tactical map. I was looking down at the states. It was nighttime. The coastlines were dark. The cities were just faint clusters of orange. But then, these pinpricks of white light started to ignite. They weren't in the business districts. They weren't in the stadiums. They were in the suburbs, in the rural corners of North Carolina, in the places where the rent is cheap and the hallways are narrow. I'm looking back at a comment from a video we did a few months ago. I think the handle was something like Silver Path Sorcerer 44. They talked about their grandfather who had dementia and couldn't remember his own kids' names, but would sit in his chair every night at 2 a.m. and pray with this terrifying intensity. They called it invisible work. Robert is describing a map where that work finally becomes visible. I've noticed this pattern in a few other accounts. This idea that there's a stored up energy in the elderly that society has completely ignored. Robert sees the release of that energy as a tactical event. The lights were coming from the nursing homes. I saw one in a town I recognized just outside of Fayetteville. From the street, it probably looked like a dead building, just a brick box with fluorescent lights in the lobby. But from up here, it was a silo of fire. I saw an old man. He was sitting on the edge of a twin bed. His legs were thin, his skin was like tissue paper. He was leaning forward, his head in his hands. He was just praying. But the power coming off him was hitting the sky like a signal flare. "They're waking up," he said. I looked at the jar again. The liquid inside was boiling now. The gold veins were glowing so bright I had to squint. "The ones the world said were done," he said. "They're the ones holding the front line." I felt this pressure in my ears, like a change in altitude. I knew what was coming. I've been in enough formation to know when the order to move is about to be given. It wasn't a list of instructions. It was just a feeling of readiness, a heavy, solid weight of purpose. "The gray eagles," I whispered. I thought about the scarred birds in the storm, the ones who knew how to rise. "The storm won't break them," he said. The jar started to vibrate. The glass didn't crack, but the sound of the whispers turned into a roar. It wasn't a scary noise. It was the sound of 1,000 engines starting up at the same time. The reconnaissance was over. The map was lit up from coast to coast. I looked at him one last time. I wanted to ask how long. I wanted to ask for a timeline. "The clock hasn't stopped," he said. Then the ground fell away. The deck, the gold light, the jar, everything started to blur into a single vertical line. I was heading back down. I could feel the Carolina humidity before I even saw the trees. I could feel the weight of my own 71-year-old bones waiting for me on the steps. The hit was hard. It wasn't like landing on a pillow. It was like jumping out of a moving truck and hitting the pavement at 40 miles per hour. My lungs, they just slammed shut. I was back in the 71-year-old frame, and everything hurt. My left hip felt like it had been ground into the wood. The North Carolina humidity was sitting on my chest like a wet wool blanket. I was gasping, desperate. My throat was dry, and the taste of copper was thick in my mouth. I opened my eyes and saw the gray paint of the porch ceiling. It was peeling. I focused on a single flake of paint hanging by a thread. I couldn't move my hands. They were cold. Not just chilly. They felt like they'd been kept in a meat locker for a week. Then I heard Patricia. She was screaming my name from the kitchen door. I heard the screen door bang against the frame, clack, clack, and her footsteps on the wood. I wanted to tell her I was fine. I wanted to tell her about the formation of the eagles, but I couldn't even get enough air to grunt. The ambulance ride was a series of lights and the smell of latex. The paramedics were shouting numbers. I heard someone say, 17 minutes. I just kept thinking about the jar, the way it hummed. I kept thinking about the old man I saw in that room in Fayetteville. The hospital was bright, too bright. The doctors at the facility were looking at me like I was a piece of equipment that had somehow restarted itself after the fuse had blown. They ran the EKGs, they did the scans, my heart was beating, my blood was moving. But the lead doctor, a guy with a tired face and a stethoscope that looked like it had seen better days, he just stood at the foot of my bed. He didn't say it was a miracle. He's a scientist. He just said they couldn't account for the timeline. 17 minutes. I sat in that hospital bed for 3 days and I didn't say a word to anyone, not even Patricia. I didn't know how to file the report. In the Corps, you don't talk about classified intel until you've cleared the debrief, and I didn't know who was cleared to hear this. It's been 11 days. I've been sitting on the porch every morning since I got back. Patricia thinks I'm just recovering. She thinks I'm resting my hip, but I'm watching the sky. I'm looking for the tilt in the wings. I'm 71 years old. My knees ache when the rain is coming. My hair is thin. My phone doesn't ring as much as it used to. But I don't feel like a man waiting to die anymore. I feel like a soldier who's been given a new mission. I feel like those gray feathers are starting to grow. I went out to the steps this morning. I looked at the bottom step where I went down. My Bible was back on the shelf in the living room, but I took it back out. I opened it to the page where it hit the dirt. There's still a little bit of grit caught in the spine. I didn't brush it off this time. I ran my thumb over it. It's a physical mark, a reminder that the ground is real, but so is the wind. The storm is coming. I can feel the pressure in the air. I can feel the vibration in my teeth. The gray eagles are rising, and I'm getting my gear ready. I've been reading accounts for near-death experiences for a long time, and I've noticed a pattern that I can't quite shake. There's this recurring idea of a stored reserve, whether it's light or prayers or a specific kind of spiritual fuel, that's held in these crystalline vessels. Robert's account maps onto this almost word for word, particularly this focus on the elderly being the ones holding the pressure. It makes me wonder about the logistics of it all. If there's a timeline where the things we've written off as broken or useless are actually the primary power source for whatever is coming next. I keep coming back to one detail Robert mentioned at the very end. He said he's not brushing the dirt out of the spine of that Bible anymore. It makes me wonder, if Robert's heart had stopped for 18 minutes instead of 17, what would have been left of that grit in North Carolina?